according to that clock, we've got half a minute. It's time to start. Since we're all here, might as well go ahead. Glad to see all of you. We've got to have some visitors, and we're grateful for your presence. Sorry, there are some of us who are not well, and that prevents them from being with us, but we're thankful to start off the week in a good way. Our Bible readings since Wednesday, Thursday through today have been in the book of Romans, chapters 1 through 10, and we're going to go through that just very, very briefly. I believe the theme of Romans has been stated a number of times, and I think it's accurate, is in 1:16 and 17, where the gospel is God's what? His power to save us. And in it is revealed his righteousness, how God makes us righteous in the gospel. And so he starts off by showing the universal need of this gospel by saying that the Gentiles are all what? In chapter 1.
Sinful, lost in sin.
That's right. Lost in sin, terrible conditions. And he paints a dreary picture of how a nation can go once it rejects God from its knowledge. But in chapter 2, he deals with the justice of God. God is fair. And so he deals with that, and then he comes back and says, now you Jews who have had opportunities, you're no better in a lot of ways than these Gentiles. So he concludes in 3 verse 9 that all are under what? Under sin. And he shows there's none righteous, no, not one. The universality of sin. And then he begins to show how God has started a process even it was predicted in the prophets that God would have a process by which we could be justified. And the simple explanation is it's in faith, it's by faith in Jesus Christ. Not faith only, but it's faith in a system other than just law by itself. Doesn't mean that we don't have law in the New Testament, but it's not law only. There's a mixture of grace and salvation with it. So in chapter 4, he says there are 2 Old Testament characters who illustrated this. One is they're illustrious. Who are they, David? Abraham, and who's the other one? He wrote a lot of Psalms. David, that's right. And in fact, he quotes from the Psalm. Blessed is the man whose sins are forgiven, whose iniquities are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. So then he shows how the significance of Abraham in 4. Then 5, 6, 7, and 8. It looks like to me the best way you can describe it is that we are freed from a number of things. We are freed first from what Adam brought into the world, which was, well, we're freed from sin, but the consequence of sin, death. Freed from death. Seems like 5:12 especially. 6, you said it. We're freed from sin in chapter 6, 1 and 2. And we have been freed from it, and so we're servants of righteousness. In 7, we're freed from the law. And then 8, we're freed from what the law would bring through sin. There's therefore now no C word, condemnation. We're freed from being condemned in chapter 8. And then 9 through 11, it's almost like 1 through 8. You have the Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God to salvation. And then in 9 through 11, to the Jew first, also to the Greek. There in 9 through 11, it's where the Jews and the Gentiles fit together. In 9, he says, now God has made various choices in the past. And it's not any unfairness on God's part, but he chose Abraham and not others. He chose Isaac. He chose Pharaoh. And in the end of 9, he says, no, he's chosen Christ in the gospel, through whom everybody can be reconciled. And so in 10, he makes the point that whosoever calls on the name of the Lord, regardless of Jew or Gentile, he can be saved. I know we haven't gotten to 11, but in a nutshell, he anticipates the question, well, what then advantage do we have, the Jews? And well, every way. And you were the original olive tree, so to speak, and yet you were what? You were cut off. And yet, those of you who are a part of this can be, you can be grafted back in just as the Gentiles do. That's in 11, but we'll get to that a little bit. So Romans is, I just finished studying it with a younger fellow, and just the two of us. And it's just, you can't, if you like I told him, if you get Romans down and Galatians and Hebrews, you really tie both covenants together in such a way that pretty much no other book does, or books do. And it's really helpful to know those books backward and forward. All right, we're studying in the life of Jesus. And the Sermon on the Mount, you know, we're in the particular phase of our study through the Waldron's tiered effect, that, you know, we're not just continuing to kind of gloss over and get the high points. We're trying to really flesh it out. And so, as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have recorded the life of Jesus, Matthew emphasizes the what of heaven. That gives it what the kingdom of heaven, his emphasis on the kingdom. And so, we'll not go back on all that, but to think about where we are in the overall scheme of the life of Christ. We had those 30 years of preparation, primarily in the book of what account primarily tells you about those early years. I mean, there are more than one, but primarily which one? Luke. Good. And so I heard somebody say, which one? I'll tell you the answer and you tell me the question. Which one tells us about Jesus that antedates his life on earth? Somebody said it. Was it you, David? John, yes. And so those first 18 verses, the prologue. So here we have the years of preparation in the beginning ministry, and primarily, what book deals with that? Not Luke, but after his baptism. Matthew does some, but there are at least 3 chapters given over to it. John, yes. The early disciples of John down here when Jesus comes back. John 2, quick trip to Galilee, to Cana, Capernaum, and back. And then 3, the interview with Nicodemus. And 4, the interview with the woman at the well. And so that's in 4. Then he goes to Cana, Nazareth, Capernaum, makes that his home. And then we come over here and talk about the miracles that he's been performing up here in Galilee. And one thing that has gotten him into a problem with the Pharisees is that his healings, some of them at least recorded, have been on what? On the Sabbath day. Did he actually violate the Sabbath on any occasion? No. But he violated their traditions about the Sabbath. And so keep all that in the back of your mind. In 1 Peter 2, hereunto were we called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving us an example that we should follow, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. Jesus never violated the law. So we've been there, and then after a night of prayer, he calls these 12, and then we have him on a little area right outside, looking over on a little mountain, and he's actually on a level place there right outside. So you've noticed I've had the background picture, kind of almost a watermark in the background. Here's the Sea of Galilee, and here he is speaking to these people all these things that they've been talking about. So he tells them that the kinds of quality of character that a person absolutely has to have in order to be a part of the kingdom, and the Beatitudes: poor in spirit, mourning over sin, meek, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, merciful, pure in heart. What else? Peacemakers, and then people who are willing to be what? Persecuted for righteousness' sake. And then the only influence really the world has are from people who are trying to be like this. You're the salt and the light. But since he has been giving these things, and people think, well, you know, he's at odds with the Pharisees. He says, don't think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. And then our relation to the law of keeping even what some would consider least commandments. And then he talks, well, let's see. I don't have it. Remember the Luke passage that I had on the right-hand side of the screen in Luke 6. Jesus places as almost like the loaves of bread for a sandwich in between all the goodie. He says, love your enemies. And he gives all these specifics that we're talking about in Matthew, and he does in Luke. And then he ends it up. Even so I say unto you, love your enemies. And so all of this is, I want you to love people like I love you. And so rather than murder, don't do what? Don't be angry without cause. And if you've done something wrong, if a brother has aught against you, go and you're offering there. If when you are offering your altar, your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has aught against thee, leave what? Your gift at the altar, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come back. So reconcile wrongs immediately. And you've heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say don't look at a woman to lust after her. And then he talks about if there is a problem along these lines, something you like to see, something you like to do with your hands, what? Pluck it out or cut it off. And then the only rightful reason for divorce is if a person commits adultery. And so that's the context of this. And then he said, now you've also heard it said, thou shalt not swear thyself or swear falsely, perjure yourself, but perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say, don't do what? Don't swear at all. Let's turn back to this passage where we are and just reread it, and we'll try to. I wanted to say several things more. We touched on it Wednesday night. Let's reread it, Brother Charlie, if you would, 33 through 37. Okay, we're going to glance over some of this. We made kind of an outline and dealt with this somewhat Wednesday night. Note what oaths are, oaths in the Old Testament, evidently what Jesus alluded to, what his answer is, and I'm going to deal just a little bit with this idea of judicial oaths and then application. In essence, to swear is to call on a greater being or thing as a witness of the testimony that you're giving is true. That's in essence what it is. The appeal to God in an oath implies the person but also we want to remember that what is significant about an oath is that it basically agrees. If I'm not telling the truth, I invite God's what? God's judgment on me. And that's what imprecatory psalms were. The person imprecates God's vengeance and renounces his favor if the declaration is false. And we looked at this Wednesday night. The Mosaic law limited widespread oath-taking to oppress the sacredness of oaths, forbidding a person to swear falsely. Only two kinds were mentioned. One in the Old Testament, that is. One is false oaths regarding a witness, and then a false asseveration, that is an emphatic declaration regarding something found or received. Both required a sin offering. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia has a really great article on that. I adapted some of that. The third commandment, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, is in essence not only a loose use of God's name, but it also would be involved in using God's name, swearing on God, or calling God as a witness, and then telling a lie. That's calling God into cahoots, so to speak, or into connection, or It's referring him back to us and making him in league with a lie. And so don't do that either. It was understood to include false swearing. And we mentioned this, I believe, Wednesday night. Jews swore by God's name as a sign of loyalty to him. Deuteronomy 6 is intended. You swear by God's name, you must keep your word. However, swearing by false gods was common. And in ordinary conversation, it was common to swear by the life of the person addressed. These are passages related to this. Or by the life of the king. Or by one's own head, as we read in Matthew 5. Or by the earth in the verse preceding. Or by heaven. Josephus talks about, it's not in the Bible, but that some Jews swore by angels. And then Matthew 23:16, by the temple, but not the gold of the temple, or by the offering, by the offering, but not the altar that the offering is offered on. The oath by heaven is what Jesus said involved God's name. What I'd like to do, because I think it really helps us to appreciate where Jesus was coming from, and it doesn't really say it here, is turn over a few chapters to the 23rd chapter of Matthew, Matthew 23. And 16 through 22 is the passage that Jesus really, in withering language, excoriates these Jews for trying to divide hairs as to when they had to tell the truth and when they could prevaricate some. Brother Landon, if you would, read those verses, 16 through that paragraph, through 22.
Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it.
That's good. Thank you. All right. In essence, if you swear by any greater thing or being, it always brings someone into league with that. Who is it? It's God. It's God. So there's no way you can. And basically, that what they were doing again is trying to just split hairs, and they were splitting hairs in order that they might be able to do what and get away with it. Lie. Yeah, that's the point. And were these just your common everyday people or religious people? They're religious people. Some of you may remember this. Let's see, you'd have to be older than I am or study it. You remember when when John F. Kennedy was running for office and to be president, and there was a big outcry among a lot of people because he was a Roman Catholic. And Roman Catholics have something that came up hundreds of years ago that will allow them, if they think the end justifies the means, to lie. And it's called something. Mental reservation. Mental reservation. And it was part of the Catholic doctrine that if there was something, what they considered a greater good being accomplished, that you could lie. And so Kennedy was grilled on a lot of them. Say, you remember that, Sister Violet? Well, you were alive in 60, I know. Richard, you remember what I'm talking about? That was a big thing, wasn't it? All over, yeah. I know Brother Gene, Sister Janet, some of the rest of you.
He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, which is the Catholic male organization. They brought that up a lot.
Yes. But the idea is that under certain circumstances you can lie with impunity. That was the idea behind it. And this is really what these Pharisees are doing. We can swear, which gives the people who are listening the idea, oh, he's really doing what? He's telling the truth, when actually you're not. But there seemed to be this idea that if you invoked the specific name of God in an oath, oh, you better keep it then. But if you did not invoke the name of God, but you used other things that were higher than you, but not necessarily naming God, then you could lie and get away with it. Hence, as he said here back in Matthew 5, and that's so evident in Matthew 23, and Jesus lambasted these people. He said, you think you can swear by the temple and it's nothing. That is, you don't have to keep your word, but if you swear by the gold that makes up the temple, you're bound to do it. That's just splitting hairs, and in a way to try to allow them to be deceptive. Back in chapter 5, I think it's interesting when Jesus says here, again ye have, verse 33, again ye have heard that it was said to them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. I think unto the Lord would be their significant emphasis. Make sure if you swear using the Lord's name, you better keep it. And understood is, but if you do other things, if you swear by other things, what? You're not. That's right. And so all of these ideas, swearing on the life of a person, swearing by one's own head, by the earth, by heaven, by angels, by certain parts of the temple, by Jerusalem, that they were trying to be able to swear and get and not tell the truth and get away with it. So essentially, we talked about this, I think, Wednesday night. The Old Testament did not originate oaths. In fact, the taking of an oath goes way back into it antedated the law. It goes back into Genesis. Even God swore with an oath to Abraham. Others swore. So it did not originate oaths, but similar to divorce, in that it did not originate but regulated. The law directed Jews to swear by God's name and then keep the oaths they made. However, these regulations were never intended to be a license to lie when not under a oath. It wasn't the fact that, well, now you can lie anytime you want, as long as you don't take God's name, put God's name attached to it. 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination to him. One of them is lying, a lying tongue. A lying tongue. He hates that. Always has hated that. Abraham is guilty of it in Genesis 12, down in Egypt with Pharaoh, when he said that my wife is actually my wife, sister. And then with Abimelech in Genesis 20, and then Isaac followed his dad's bad example in Genesis 26. These are great men, but they lied. And that was not right on that occasion, on those occasions. What Jesus alluded to, notice his quotation is not specifically mentioned in the Old Testament paraphrasing. He said, you've heard, don't swear falsely, but make sure you keep the oaths that are under the Lord. Essentially, and again, I kind of talked through this a moment ago. If you involve the Lord's name in oaths, you better keep your word, or otherwise, it's bad on you. Therefore, the Pharisees created a loophole for deceit and lying even in other oaths. To them, one could lie under certain circumstances, even taking certain oaths, and there would not be any penalty for it. We just read that. It's a divine commentary. Jesus there and here in the sermon showed that by the nature of eating oath, they are referable to God. It all goes back. If you swear by heaven, it's the throne of God. Or by the earth, it's the footstool of his feet. Or by Jerusalem, it's the city of the great king. Or if you swear even on your own life, on yourself, on even your head, you swear on your head, he says you don't have power to do what? Make one hair black or white. Swearing on your own head also could include, when we were small, you'd hear people say, I swear on my heart and hope to die. You remember everything? Cross my heart. Yeah, cross my heart. Thank you.
Don't forget this.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, cross your fingers, put them behind your back, and you can tell a lie and get away. It's the same idea. And cross my heart and hope to die. That, in essence, that's the idea of a calling God hope to die. That's calling God's wrath or his vengeance down on me if I tell a lie. And what Jesus says is that in doing all of that, you don't have any power even to change the color of your hair. That was before Grecian formula. You can't do that. And really, we owe our lives to God anyway. So the point is, while we have no power even over the color of our hair, in a sense, swearing by oneself or one's life or one's head over whom God is to rule, all refer back to God and are meaningless otherwise. So the emphasis of Jesus' statement is, though he deals with those, the emphasis is not so much on that, though he obviously discusses it, but on deception and deceit. That was the problem he's dealing with. They were trying to mince words and use certain oaths and lie, and it would be okay. But if they had just mentioned the name of God, they were bound. So it's what Pharisees had honed to a fine skill. A disciple should tell the truth under all circumstances. And then it's interesting, the simplicity of Jesus' instruction. But I say to you, let your yea be yea, or yes be yes, and your nay, nay, or no, no. And then that little phrase that we're often out to overlook. Any more than these is of the evil one. Any more. Now, it's interesting. Is it true that some answers that we might give to someone require more than just a yes or no? Yeah, obviously. Some questions you're asked, it's a yes and a no, depends on what form of the question it takes and where people are going with it. But I think the idea is, let your yea be yea and your nay, nay, is a simplicity about that, to the degree that there is absolutely no misunderstanding. Now, what happens is, someone will, and you see this in politics all the time, somebody will ask a simple question, do you believe this? Instead of yes or no, they get this extended answer that only slightly relates to the question that's raised, and it's given in order to do what to people? Distract, dodge, confuse the issue. And he says, don't do that. Be transparent. You know, when you think about transparency, that goes all the way back to the Beatitude. Blessed are the pure in heart. Yeah, they shall see God. And the idea is there's a non-contamination. We are what we are. We are what you see. We're just transparent. And that's what true disciples are. So, the simplicity in Jesus' statement is a simple, straightforward, answer. No hedging, no prevarication. A half-truth is actually a truth designed to do what? To deceive. That's a half-truth. You could say that in Genesis 3, you remember when the devil, when he said, why don't you take this fruit? And Eve said, no, we shouldn't eat it. We shouldn't even touch it lest we die. And he said, oh, God knows at the end of the day that you'll become wise as he, when you eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll become wise. Well, in a sense, just think about the truth in that, the half-truth. It was a deliberate, what he was telling them, it was a deliberate violation of God's will. Don't eat of the forbidden. I mean, that was simple. Don't do it. But what the devil used was, well, you know, it's an accusation against God. He's just trying to hem you in. You'll become wise like he is. But then he says, when you'll know right or wrong, in a sense, he was right. Because before their eating, they had been right. And after their eating, they had experienced what? Evil. So they would experimentally know the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. After they, so it really was a lie couched within a half-truth. And the devil did that at the very beginning. And so it's interesting, any more than this is of the evil one. And Jesus said in some translations, the evil one. Any more than prevarication or being duplicitous, all these words that we use to talk about politicians who are, you know, kind of hedging around the question or making you think, as I think Landon said, it's a dodge and want you to look at something else. All of these things are of the devil. They're of the evil one. Just be out front. What's right. Anybody? Look, Janet, you look like you want to say something. Anybody? Lindsay?
See this superficiality of that kind of reason is
Blown away.
it's like a child.
Yes.
It's like the heart.
Yes.
In the Jewish explanations of the law, you can't take your belongings out of the house if it's on fire, but you can put your shirt on one at a time and run in and out. Just the silliness of it.
It is.
And they were so bound to this stuff. You see, I know you've seen an old movie, it's the Mideast and this market, and somebody said, oh, I swear by my mother's grave, this is gold or something, some movie plot. And that was so common in Eastern culture. And one thing in Eastern culture, Mideastern, is they say something like, if you're not close enough to a fellow to smell his breath when he's talking, you will be lying. And I don't know if you've had many friends from that area, but they get in your space.
Yeah.
They will get right up in your face and talk to you. And that's, they believe, you know, that's their culture is inbred.
Yeah.
I knew this old Lebanese fellow, and, you know, he was a good friend, and he was in a miserable situation in life. And he used to call me to come and work on something at his house because he wanted to see something.
You just want to talk with you. Yeah.
And he had to feed you, and he wanted to put his arm around you, and he'd get his face right here and talk to you.
Yeah.
And bad breath.
In addition.
But he, you know, he said, this is the way we are.
Yeah.
We talk about that.
Yeah. It's a culture. And you know, sometimes a culture can bleed off on people. I was thinking, you know, sometimes we speak in broad brushes, that generally speaking, that, well, we think Cretans, Paul said in Titus 1, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, idle gluttons. That's kind of a broad brush. But there on the Isle of Crete, he said, this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou mightest set in order the things they're wanting and appoint elders. So obviously, even in a culture, there are good people. They can come out of that culture. And what we have to do is just, you know, teach the truth and act on the truth, encourage people to practice the truth. Yeah, real good, real good. Anybody else? Anybody? Can't believe it. Nobody will say anything. Okay, David, you look like you were leading the dog. I'm sorry. I think it depended on what it was over. I think it did, yeah. I can't remember offhand what it was over though. I know if, well, we've got no Does anybody know offhand? I cannot say for sure. I know back in passage in Exodus, Deuteronomy 6 is what always comes to mind. Deuteronomy 6:13, I believe it is. Yeah, thou shalt fear Jehovah thy God, and him shalt thou serve, and shalt swear by his name. Swear by his name. And other people. That'd be a good thing for you to look up. Tell us Wednesday night. Richard knows about that, don't you, Richard? We were studying Life of Christ 2, 3, 4 years ago, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago. And John Burge, bless his heart, he would always ask some question that most of us don't think about. And so I finally got the answer to John. He says, John, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Why don't you look that up during the week, and come back and tell us, have this little article on that. So he did that about 2 times more. And after that, Janet, you remember, after that, he decided he started asking, I better not ask that question. Hey, more homework.
In Judges 21:5, there was an assembly that the people made a great oath concerning him that came not up to Jehovah to Mizpah, saying he shall surely be put to death.
Mm-hmm.
So they
Swore that if someone did not come to the assembly, that he would be, the one who did not come would be put to death. Yeah.
fellow that failed to keep that oath.
Yeah. Could be.
But I don't necessarily believe that God generated that.
No, that was on their own.
They did some things that.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. Yeah, that was a judge, Jephthah, yeah. And he did, the rash vow of Jephthah. Okay, Jesus' answer, is don't swear at all, neither by heaven is the throne of God, the earth is his footstool, the city of Jerusalem is the city of the great king. There are reasons why swearing is unnecessary for a true disciple. One is that swearing will not make a lie true. How many times do we know of people who have sworn under, they perjured themselves, and in so doing, did that take the lie that they were telling and somehow miraculously turn it into the truth? Absolutely not. And so swearing will not make a lie true. If I tell you the truth, and I'm telling you exactly how something is that I'm aware of, if I swear, will that make the truth that I tell any more true? It won't. If truth is truth regardless. And if it is so, that if I'm swearing that I will make a truth it's somehow more true, then it implies other statements a person makes, not under oath, cannot be trusted. And that goes back to where the Pharisees were. That if there were certain things that they swore to that did not involve the name of God, you really couldn't trust them. In fact, they did, in Matthew 23, if you swear by the temple, you're not bound, but if you swear by the gold of the temple, you better keep. So all of those kinds of things do that. One other passage here on this score. Let's look at James 5:12, and whoever has that first, read it, please. James 5:12.
But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath. If your yes is to be yes and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Gene. That last phrase, whereas Jesus in the sermon says, any more than these is of the evil one, James says that you fall not under judgment. So either way you cut it, in the Sermon on the Mount or in James 5:12, whenever a person seeks to be duplicitous, he says you're liable for what? To be what, Landon? To be judged. That's right. You're involved with the evil one and all of that. So James 5:12 is a parallel. Okay, you didn't ask this, but I've been asked a number of times about it, and you probably got to. But what about judicial oaths? There are some brethren who say this doesn't apply to judicial oaths. And there are at least two arguments, and I'm got up here. Some say Jesus did not condemn taking judicial oaths, but condemned swearing falsely. Well, we come back to exactly what Jesus said. He did not simply say, you have heard it said, thou shalt not swear falsely, but I say don't swear falsely. That's just a repetition of the same thing. He didn't say, you have heard it said, don't swear falsely, but I say to you, don't swear falsely. Rather, he said, don't swear at all. He didn't say, okay, now under certain, there are some brethren who make the point, we don't need to do what these Jews were doing, but we can swear by God or swear in court of law and all that. Just make sure we keep the truth. But that's exactly what Jesus said don't do. And then some say, well, we have swearing on the part of other people, like God, in swearing to Abraham. Surely blessing I will, God swore to Abraham, saying, surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. And then Paul deals with it in Hebrews 6. Since he could swear by none greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. Then Jesus Christ before Caiaphas, when Caiaphas said, I adjure thee by the living God, tell us, art thou the Christ? What Jesus said? Thou sayest. Thou sayest. You've said it. He said, what you said that I'm the Christ. That's how things are. And in Revelation 10:5 and 6, an angel swears to God. And then people sometimes say, but the Apostle Paul swore when he called God as a witness relative to his not coming to Corinth. So people then say, therefore we can take judicial oaths or oaths on occasion of solemn religious importance. Well, I think a couple of answers, 2 or 3 answers to that. One is that swearing was primarily for confidence for the person hearing the testimony that the person is telling the truth. When Abraham asked God, how can I know that, how can I know? Well, or in the early days of the world, in Abraham's life, some kind of confidence, God acquiesced to the weakness of Abraham and said, surely blessing I will bless thee. And so he swore by himself. Surely God did that. There's no question about that. God swore relative to Abrahamic promises to accommodate the weaknesses on Abraham's part. However, God, angels swore, Revelation 10, have done many things man cannot and should not do, such as take vengeance or strike people dead as God did through the various angels. So just because God has done things, and then on the accommodation in the Old Testament for the weakness of man's part. Also, as to Jesus on trial, Caiaphas demanded Jesus to swear, I adjure thee by the living God. Tell us, art thou the Christ? But Jesus simply answered without any kind of a usual formula of words that would indicate an oath. He simply said, thou sayest. You yourself have said. And that's not the words which indicate that he was agreeing. Yes, I understand I'm under oath. And he just answered the question. And these other passages also down here that we've got, Romans 1:9 and right after the salutation, when Paul expressed his desire to come to the Romans, and he said, I've longed to see you that I might impart unto you some spiritual gift to the end of you. God knows that. God is my witness. And he said similar idea here in Philippians 1:8 and Galatians 1, and that was relative to his travel plans in 2 Corinthians 1. So people say, well, when Paul said, God is my witness, that Paul was swearing. I don't believe that's accurately handling the Scripture. Any more than asking another to verify something a person says is taking an oath. If I said, I saw somebody killed yesterday, and somebody said, no, you didn't. Landon was with me. He saw it too. That's not swearing by Landon. That's just saying, Landon can verify this. And to call on somebody to verify something, we do that all the time. That does not mean that you're swearing by that person to call that person as a witness It's not the usual form of oath where you invoke the punishment of God and using God's name. It's just not the same thing. So I don't believe that when people say, well, it's okay to do that. For those reasons, I believe we can. And really, do the courts of our land allow us not to swear? Yes. It's affirmed. But even in the affirmation, it's understood if I tell a lie, I would receive the same punishment as if I had perjured myself. But it's just a matter, I think, going back to what Jesus said. Here's some applications. Always tell the truth, wherever, at work, school, neighbors, church members. How many people do you know of call in sick so they and try to use a sick day instead of a personal leave day? I'm sick. And we can tell a lie on tests at school. Homework, plagiarism, copying stuff and passing it off as our own work when it's the work of somebody else. To our neighbors or to church members. And then I think we need to always remember when we make promises. To the best of our ability, we're going to keep them. And our weddings, to you and to you only, so long as we both shall live. The paying of bills. When you sign a credit card receipt, what do you say? I'm going to pay it off. I'm going to pay it off. When you sign documents with the bank, if they issue this credit card, I'm going to pay this thing off. What promises we make in songs, prayers, and worship. Songs that we sing are filled with promises that we're singing. We're mouthing these words, so we need to be careful about that and not make references to God's name in a careless, haphazard manner, but with reverence and awe. And that really deals with the idea of profaning God's name. Jesus used this in Matthew 12. You recall that he had performed a triple miracle. And the Pharisees said, he does it by the power of Beelzebub. And Jesus gave a lengthy reply to that. And in essence, he said, their reply, their oral reply is an indices to their heart. And he goes on to describe how the things that are in our heart come through our mouth. And then he ends up saying that every word a man says, by those words he will be justified or condemned. Every idle word that a man states. So we have to be careful about that, not to use God's name that way. Careless use of God's name, or what is closely related to His name, is to be my God, or good Lord, or Lord, Lord, my heavens, as interjections. And derivatives of the word God, like they were trying to do. You can swear by the temple, something's related to God, but as long as you don't use the name of God, well, that's kind of like euphemisms. Gosh and golly. The New Century Dictionary says immense form of God, often used as a mild oath, or good gosh for good God, or by golly. All of those are uses of God's name in such a flippant way. It obviously is taking His name in vain, but it also goes back to the idea of the old law, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and that's related to swearing. Comment, question? Anybody? Landon, anything? Anybody else? Yes, sir, Carcel. Yeah, 123. Mm-hmm. They use that as an example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some I've known have used that along with some others to say, well, here Paul swore on certain occasions. And so they'll kind of make it apply to certain occasions of great religious significance. But Jesus didn't say that. Right. No, just by calling God as His witness. Yes. And I've known, I remember Brother Hedrick one time, somebody was talking about a church problem. He said, with God as my witness. This is what this person said. With God as my witness. He didn't swear. But he's saying, this is true. I understand God is watching every word I say. And not because he did it. I'm just saying, I think that it's a difference, Carville, between swearing and, just saying. He could verify this. Okay, we got to stop, guys.